Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with the U of M Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. I'm your host, Wiam Nemu. Today, our special guest is Dr. Elizabeth Knott. Elizabeth is a postdoctoral associate in the Yale Babylonian Collection and lecturer in the Department of Near Eastern Language and Civilizations. In 2018, she completed her PhD at New York University with a dissertation titled Marie's Ištar Rituals and the Politics of Divine Multiplicity in the Age of Warring Kings. Trained as a philologist and art historian, she uses multiple categories of evidence in her research, focusing especially on the ways in which gods, kings, and peoples were represented in ancient Iraq and Syria. At the Yale Babylonian Collection, she is managing a digitization project that aims to photograph and document over 4,000 cylinder and stamp seals in the collection. Her goal is to use advanced documentation techniques to further explore the carving and imagery of these miniature objects. Welcome, Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Wiam. I'm delighted to be here with you.
I'm so happy that we were able to meet in person. Like last year in December when you were passing by in Michigan. That's, over time, because of some reproductions that the Chaldean Cultural Center is purchasing for our museum, we have learned so much about the Babylonian collection. And what we would like to know is, when was the Yale Babylonian Collection founded and what does it mostly comprise of?
Yeah, great. Well, the Yale Babylonian Collection here in New Haven was founded in the fall of 1911 by Albert T. Clay, who was an Assyriologist at Yale and a professor. Over time, the collection has grown so that today we have about 40,000 objects or more, which is pretty incredible, right? I think the collection has always been primarily a sort of resource reference for students and scholars. But what's really interesting about the collection today is that it's opening up to the public in new and important ways. And that's happening under the leadership of the associate curator, Agneta Lassen, and in conjunction with the other postdoctoral associate, Klaus Wagensanner. So it's an exciting time to be part of this sort of hidden collection that has a bunch of treasures from the ancient world.
Yeah, I visited the website and there's just like endless material to view. So it'll take us a lifetime, but that's okay. It's really worth it. So what are some of the highlights of the Babylonian collection?
Yeah, it's very hard to describe what the highlights are. Like 40,000 objects, right? I haven't even seen them all. I've been here for 2 years and I haven't even seen them all. But I would say we primarily have two types of objects. The first is clay tablets, which are small, and I have one right here, small clay objects that are inscribed with cuneiform writing. And those come from ancient Mesopotamia. They date anywhere from, let's say, about 4000 BCE to 200 BC. And this is the primary bulk of the objects in our collection. This is sort of like the equivalent of ancient letters, administrative documents, all of these types of things. So that's the bulk of the collection. The other thing that we have in the collection are seals. And we have cylinder and stamp seals. I have a cylinder seal here, if you can see it. It's a tiny little stone engraved with imagery, and it acted like a stamp. So you would press it down and push and roll, and you're left with an impression, just very similar to the way that we use stamps today. And these were administrative tools that were owned by specific individuals. We have about 4,000 of those. When it comes to highlights, then, if that's the bulk of our collection, then highlights, I think the one thing that I first knew about Yale's Babylonian collection was that the collection has one of the earliest tablets recording the famous Gilgamesh epic throughout the world. So this is the Akkadian Gilgamesh epic. It appears to have been compiled or begun to be composed sometime around let's say 2000, 1800 BCE. And Yale has one of these earliest tablets, and it only tells part of the story because the full story could last for 12 big tablets. But the part of the story that the tablet here tells is when Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu are planning to go to the cedar forest, and Gilgamesh is having a lot of bad dreams, and his buddy and friend Enkidu is sort of encouraging him along in the adventure. So that's one of the highlights.
So so there's how many tablets from the Gilgamesh? There's 12.
12, yep.
You have all of them?
We do not have all of them. So what we know about the Gilgamesh epic is that by, let's say, 800 BCE, there was a 12 tablet long text. So you can think of this as like a multi-volume work or something, right? And earlier than that, it seems like they were still in the process of developing and forming the story. So it's not clear around like 1,000 years earlier how many tablets were there, but we know that there were multiple tablets, and we have one of those tablets.
Okay, you have one of those tablets. Okay. And so with regards to the other tablets, for the 40,000 that you have, are they all translated and already, like, I know they're not all digitized, but are they at least all translated or not yet? Is that like a process?
Yeah, that's a process that's been happening for the past century, and is continuing to happen. You know, when we're looking at the tablets, there's sort of two different ways that we can work on them. One is to get photographs of those tablets and to publish those photographs online so that everyone has access to those tablets. And that's the digitization project that we're working on right now, and that's being led by Klaus Wagensahner. The other thing that we can do is we can translate them and then publish the translations. And that's some of the work that was done sort of early on, was especially focusing on translating some of the texts and getting them out in publications. A bunch of those early publications are on the webpage of the Yale Babylonian Collection.
Yes.
But what we're really working on now is getting those photographs so that everyone can see them, and anyone who can read cuneiform can then go and translate the text themselves.
That's awesome. So there's this a cylinder that you guys had mentioned from the early Neo-Babylonian period that I don't know if I have this accurately or not. I don't know if it mentions the word Chaldean or it was mentions somebody who was Chaldean. Can you describe that tablet?
Sure. So this is a cylinder-shaped tablet. So it's got this kind of barrel-like look to it. We have several of those kind of shapes of texts in our collection. And it's a tablet that was written on behalf of a ruler. And the text describes how a particular king moved a tomb of an individual from one location to another. And it seems like he's moving this tomb back closer to the deceased individual's family. Now, this deceased individual, his name is, and I'm looking at my notes, is Shamash Ibni. And he is from the tribe that is known as the Beit Dakuri. And the Beit Dakuri is one of the Chaldean tribes. So it seems like he was an important Chaldean chieftain whose tomb had been originally located further north. And this king is mentioning that he's making sure his tomb is returned south towards his people. And we think the king probably did this because he knew it was an important tribe and he wanted to be in their good graces.
Okay, can you, I don't know if you mentioned it, like I was so busy like listening to the story, but did you mention the date on that tablet?
Sure. So this was, as you said, a Neo-Babylonian period. So this is going to be more around like 500 BC.
Around 500 BC. Okay, thank you. And so you are teaching a graduate seminar on the ancient city of Mari, is that? Okay. And it's old Babylonian period archives. So what are those archives? I read a little bit about them and they seem so interesting. So
yeah, well, I think the place to start is this incredible thing that can happen sometimes, which is clay lasts for a long time. It's very durable, especially if it's fired, it's incredibly durable. So unlike paper documents, clay documents can last for millennia and millennia. And that's what's happened. And in certain cases, when archaeologists go and excavate particular cities, they find like a library or an archive of documents. And then suddenly we'll get an influx of 10, 20,000 texts all in one go, because we've basically found a building that stored some of these written documents. So that's a little bit of what happened at Mari. Mari is a city that is located on the Euphrates River. It's in Syria, but incredibly close to the border with Iraq and just a bit north of Baghdad. This is a really fantastic and important city. One of the reasons it's so important is that indeed they found archives totaling about 20,000 texts from the city, and those 20,000 texts cover, let's say, a 50-year period. So if you can imagine having 20,000 texts to go through to document just 50 years of history, and 50 years of history that was 4,000 years ago, that's pretty incredible, because now you can begin to build out personal details, relationships between individuals. So it's an exciting body of material. I will also say that Mari is exciting because it also, these archives were found in a royal palace, and the preservation of this palace shows that it was an enormous monument, incredibly important, probably 2 stories tall with 200 rooms or something like this. So there's archaeological importance to the site. And then for people who study text, there's these 20,000 texts. I brought with me a recent publication of a bunch of the texts that is called From the Mari Archives. This is by Jack Sasson. And Jack Sasson is one of the foremost scholars of the Mari texts, and he also just loves any letter that has a little bit of drama to it. So he has a real sense, right, for the lives and the exciting nature of the lives of ancient people and the exciting nature of these communications. So it's a fantastic volume if anyone's ever interested in just seeing what is it like when someone writes an ancient letter, what is the kind of stuff that they're talking about.
Yeah, and they seemed like such prolific writers. Then did they just, was it a lot of it like notes? I know that in ancient Mesopotamia, they have so many of these tablets that are just, a lot of them are just receipts, for instance. Was it more about their life, or did it include just different topics from all across?
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. It covers a period of 3 kings who were in place. And those kings all had to conduct communication across a broad geographic expanse. So we have a bunch of administrative texts from Mari, but we also have thousands of letters that refer to the fact that they are trying to communicate across distance to help conduct sort of business in this kingdom of theirs and to contact other rulers in neighboring regions, but then also, you know, just to deal with any internal problems that come up. Probably one of the more exciting stories from this, just as an example, is we have a ruler named Samsi Adu who had 2 sons, and he ruled this enormous kingdom. So he put his 2 sons on the thrones of individual cities. The older one on a city in the east, and the younger one at Mari. And it seems like this younger son at Mari, Yasma Adu, really struggled to get a hold of what it was like to rule. So we have these letters from his dad basically admonishing him, saying like, you need to do a better job. You know, why can't you be more like your brother? Like, you know, come on, pull it together. You made a horrible decision doing this or a horrible decision doing that. So you really get the flavor of.
This sounds like a modern day family, right?
Yeah, you could write a soap opera around the Mari kings and their families and everything that's going on. You have some letters from princesses who are complaining about various ways that they've been treated. You could really have a full like narrative TV special on the Mari kings from these letters.
And, you know, interestingly, this is the first time that I had heard of them is by researching the kind of work that you do. So, you know, it's some of these things, sometimes we discover the things that are more commonly like distributed and talked about, but this is like something that's so special, like a little treasure that sometimes people are not aware of. And I was wondering that, as given your studies and your research, how was that period, you know, related to the gods and the kings and the people. So it seems like during that time, it was also mostly male rulers at that time. Were there any, because I know prior to that, there was sometimes different rulers and different genders involved. And how was it during that period, that particular period?
Yeah. Generally, what we see, and this is kind of true throughout Mesopotamian history, is we see kings, male rulers. However, we often see sort of power behind the throne in the form of queens. And that is sometimes because queens would sort of help guide their young sons when they first came into power, or because while the kings had to travel, the queens were at home, and so they knew what was going on the home front. So queens were incredibly powerful contributors to the political situation. But what we usually have is male rulers. At Mari, we do have letters from queens. One king seems to have had a queen who was very much in charge of the palace while he was gone, and she would write him things saying like, everything with the palace is okay, don't worry. So it's clear that there was a real collaboration between kings and queens. It's just that the majority of our records are going to say, the king is the ruler and here's the king's actions.
Okay. What insights do these remain offer of the nature of religion in Mesopotamian history?
Yeah, religion in Mesopotamian history is so incredibly complex and fascinating. I mean, we're talking about, 4,000 years of religious history. If we think about trying to summarize our own religious history over 4,000 years, that would be pretty hard to do. So the same is true for Mesopotamia. But what happens is that we have, as I said, a bunch of administrative documents from Mari. And those administrative documents tell us that they were constantly making offerings to the gods. So Mesopotamia is a polytheistic religion. They pay attention to multiple gods. And at Mari, you get again that sense of sort of the local chaos and excitement of all the deities that are around that need to be taken care of. And so we'll have short little lists saying, oh, you have to offer like bread and oil to this deity on such and such a date. We may have a longer instructional text that says, for this festival, you need to pull out sort of this material, you need to have the singer, you need to have some other cultic specialists, and you're going to sing the song, and then you're going to make this offering. So they give you these sort of long details about like sort of what a service would look like. But they're pretty elusive because we have so few of those kind of records, and it's really hard to recreate like an ancient service. But then we also have things like letters where rulers are mentioning individual deities. So the deities aren't this sort of separate domain of life. They're really intertwined into the daily lives of people and of rulers and of politics. So we get a great sense for the range of gods and goddesses and sort of how they were thought to help or hinder various people and the impact that they had on daily life.
And, what are the current projects that the Yale Babylonian Collection is like focusing on? Because I know that during our talks, I found out that the Enheduanna tablets, that's something that you're working to digitize, or I don't know if it's digitized and then there's a different process. Like what exactly is the process to get it to the point where like people can get replicas and such?
Yeah, great question. So at Yale, I've really been working with, as you said, this digitization project. And rather than focusing on the Mari stuff, we've been focusing on how do we get the collection out to the public. And the sort of first and easiest way to do that is photography. So we have been doing as much as we can to photograph all of the objects in the collection. We have had grants from NEH and the Clear Foundation that have supported those efforts. And what you do is you take photographs of an object and then you place them online, and we make our photographs freely available online. You can download them through the Peabody Museum, Yale's Peabody Museum of Natural History. They have a collections search page. And we put anything that we photographed up online, and there will be more and more that's added over the upcoming, let's say, 6 months to that page. But then if you want a replica, you have to do a different type of capture. You have to get a 3D scan in order to make that sort of 3D print or replica. So we have photographed our tablets, for example, of Enheduanna, who's this early female author, the first known author in history, and she happens to be a priestess and daughter of a king. We have some of her tablets, and those have been photographed, but I do not think have been 3D scanned yet. And so what we need to do is to scan them with the 3D scanner so that those replicas can be made.
Yeah, okay, so the digitization process is different than the 3D scan. And then after that, that's when people can, museums or such can get replicas of these tablets.
Yeah, so some people have, some museums have begun the practice of 3D scanning all of their objects so that then you can also have a 3D model online and someone can just sort of move the object around online for their own interests. And that's really fantastic. We've been focusing more on high quality photography that allows you to really zoom in and look at details of everything. But we will be doing some 3D scanning, especially upon request for certain replicas. We've had replicas in exhibitions before and used them in educational contexts. So that is part of the work that is going on. I mentioned when we started that for a long time, the Yale Babylonian Collection was sort of a resource for scholars and students, and that's still very true. I'm actually in the classroom that's used for students at Yale who are studying cuneiform. This is the room that they sit in as they are doing work. You can see there are a couple actual tablets behind me in the cases, but we are trying to make our materials more and more accessible to the public. And we can do that through online by doing things like photographing the tablets. We can do that through exhibitions. And so we have 2 exhibitions that have gone up recently. One of them has a freely available catalog online, and the other we're hoping to turn into a virtual exhibition quite soon. So this is actually
okay.
The catalog, Ancient Mesopotamia Speaks, from the exhibition that was open about a year or 2 ago.
Okay.
And this actually has a bunch of the highlights. So if you're interested in an overview of Mesopotamian history, if you want to see some highlights from the collection, this is a great volume. And we are going to try to have a virtual exhibition online, let's say within the next 6 months, again, to a year, so that people can actually sort of walk through that exhibition, which is now closed.
Oh, that's really exciting. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. The other thing is that the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History, which is the museum that we are a part of, they are currently undergoing renovations. So the building is closed right now, but when it reopens in 2024, there will be an exhibition of Mesopotamian materials on display permanently, and admission will be free. So for anyone who's coming to New Haven, you'll be able to freely go look at those objects that are on display in the Peabody Museum.
Wow, this is all really exciting information. And I was just thinking that like technology has gotten to such a point where that's the beauty of us being able to share this information and look it up the way that you're describing, you know, to have access to that. It's something that's very, very special. And it seems like when you're talking a matter of 6 months or 1 year, like that's really nothing compared to all the work that's involved. And that's a lot of it is due to technology. So during the COVID and this whole period, that, I mean, I don't know, you know, it might, I'm sure it affected you guys, aside from on a health factor, but in regards to the work, did it affect the work at all? Because so much of what it seems like that you do is kind of like technology related and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for 2 to 3 months, we did not have access to the collection. We were not allowed to go into the collection, which meant no photographs can be taken, nothing can really be done. Then there have been other issues in terms of whether or not we can have student workers on campus. We also had to reorganize all of our spaces so that people each had their own individual room to work in, because we couldn't have multiple people in the same room at the same time. And then we've had some issues with equipment delivery and supplies, with everything getting slowed down. There's a practice that we use when we're documenting cylinder seals. I showed one before, a cylinder seal like this, where you roll it into clay. And for us, it helps us look at the imagery that's been carved into the stone. And so it's a really useful practice. Well, there's a national shortage of the clay that we use to create those impressions. So there have been a couple times where we had to wait for like stock to arrive in order for us to get more clay to make those impressions. So these are some of the delays. And when you say,
yeah, interesting how everybody had affected each institution, each individual on a very like individual basis. Even no, everybody's stories is different. It's like, oh, the clay. Well, I would have never thought that the clay would, yeah, but you guys are still doing really amazing work. And just were wondering, like, is any of this work sometimes associated, or is there any work that happens with Iraq and the archaeologists that are working there right now? Is there any kind of work that is involved with that or no?
I wouldn't say there's work that's directly involved, but there's several ways that we try to maintain contacts outside the bounds of Yale University, right? And as I said, one of those is through making objects available online and having now exhibitions that are freely open to the public, but we've also been doing a number of different things to try to open ourselves up to a broader audience. So we have Instagram and Facebook pages where we post a lot of information and try to share stories about what's going on in the collection. We try to give some behind the scenes looks. We had a special focus once on the conservator who works with us and some of the work she's done to restore objects. So we're trying to give our audiences these behind the scene looks. We also do accept research scholars. So researchers from Iraq could, in theory, come and do research on the collection. Of course, with the pandemic, that's a near impossibility right now, but it's something that we do support, and we do traditionally host many, many researchers throughout the year. Then we have also been in conversation with several individuals and institutions throughout the Middle East, trying to begin to develop partnerships to work together on the interpretation and presentation of these ancient objects. So our goal is, to serve our audiences and to help develop those audiences. There isn't work that we are participating right now, sort of on the ground in Iraq or Syria or any other country in the Middle East, but we're very interested in opening ourselves up to those conversations and trying to develop partnerships.
So that's great. I mean, regarding COVID, that also limited how, people can travel and things like that, but then you would be probably changing it back to how you were operating before COVID with regard to Iraqi scholars and people being able to travel and stuff like that. So I really love all this information, obviously, since we work at the Chaldean Cultural Center, and there's where right now we have an event that is coming up in April that kind of focuses on food and Mesopotamian and Iraqi food. And there was a couple of recipes that we're going to be creating replicas of. And this is when we learned, we actually saw articles of those. That's how we were introduced. So you really do a great job with publishing materials, notifying people. And we've been also following you on Instagram, and we love that, how you used the tablets in a very creative way to create like a new cooking in the kitchen, but you make it so much fun. And this is all important. This is what like social media allows us to do. So yeah, this is how we learned about some of the things that you guys are involved in. And I'm looking forward to more of the things, including the Enhadwana digitization and the 3Ds of Enhadwana, because it gave us ideas to do in the future, like presentations or events kind of tailored around a particular, like International Women's Day, or, certain things that relate to some of the historical things that happen in ancient Iraq and ancient Mesopotamia. So you guys are doing really amazing work. I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it. And we look forward to continuing to see what is going to come out of those 40,000 tablets that you're going down the line to post up there. But I really appreciate all your work. And, I don't know if you have any last words for our audience that you want to share, or
I would just say
like,
that,
yeah, go ahead.
no, please.
Well, I was gonna say, I think like sometimes we had this discussion before that sometimes it feels like that world it's disconnected or is just it's just placed in history books and in certain like in the Bible or certain areas, you know, or in academia, but it's an area that's very relevant and it's a civilization that's very relevant to the world. So sometimes I think that regarding technology and what it's able to do, and the Babylonian Collection at Yale, what you guys are doing with bringing it to life in a modern way. So it's kind of like just, you know, letting people feel the importance of why this matters, not just on a historical level, but in a deeper way as well.
I absolutely agree. And I think, you know, it sounds a little cliche, but there's something in Mesopotamia for everyone. I personally am not a good cook, but a lot of our students and staff and people who like to cook are fascinated by these recipes, right? Like, and so that's this insight into daily life that is stunning, and the fact that we're traveling back 4,000 years and seeing recipes that seem to be similar to dishes that are still cooked today. There are some of these letters that talk about, you know, chastising your son that I mentioned earlier. There's really so many points of relationship between the ancient and modern worlds. And of course, things were very different 4,000 years ago or even 2,000 years ago, but we're all people and there's so much to be seen and explored and enjoyed through this ancient material. And I think the goal really of the collection is to help people just enjoy that exploration and have the opportunity to explore. So I would just encourage anyone who feels an interest to just dig in and see what comes up.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us again, like I said, today. And then we hope that we could do something together in the near future, whether a workshop or anything. I know that our audience would love that and our community would really love that.
Absolutely. We look forward to that.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Bye-bye.